Well, former President Barack Obama was the final guest on Marc Maron's WTF podcast this week, and he weighed in on the state of the country. He weighed in on his fear over the Donald Trump presidency round 2, and the comments here that Barack Obama made are significant. Any former president saying what he said is significant. So I'm going to roll those clips in just one moment. Of course, stay tuned for that. But before we do, undercurrents.tv is where you can go to get a full premium experience of the show. You get extended versions of our great interviews. Subscribe on YouTube. We're almost at 100,000 and wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the moments that I identified as the most important from Obama's interview with comedian, podcaster Marc Maron, whose show began in 2015, is ending now in 2025 after about, I think, 1,600 episodes. Obama was the first president to go on a podcast when he did Marc Maron's podcast before he left office. So here he is this week talking to Marc Maron.
I mean, what was unusual for me was obviously a lot of what I represented.
Yeah.
A lot of what Michelle and I had tried to project, the values, our thinking about America.
Uh-huh.
My successor seemed to represent the opposite.
Right.
Not seemed, did.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of anger, a lot of sadness.
Yeah.
Some fear among a big chunk of the country.
And here's a clip of Obama recently speaking in a video for his foundation, the Obama Foundation. Let's go ahead and listen to him talk about how he's been, quote, increasingly concerned about the rising waves of authoritarianism.
Like many of you, I've become increasingly concerned about the rising wave of authoritarianism sweeping the globe. We're seeing politicians target civil society, undermine freedom of the press, weaponize the justice system. And no one is being spared. Even countries that thought they were immune from wholesale assaults on democracy now understand we're all part of this struggle. That's an enormous challenge.
Now, these clips from Obama to Maron are important in substance. They're also important, I think, in a secondary sense as a media story, given the arc of podcasting that Marc Maron himself has, the sort of chapter that he's helped usher in and that he's now leaving amidst. Comedians are some of the most powerful political voices now because of their mastery of the podcasting medium and in ways that I think reflect on where we are in terms of technology and the way that's shaped and changed the media. So I'll get to that in just one moment. But before we do, let's put this Jimmy Dore post up. Jimmy Dore, obviously, as a sort of skeptical leftist, has thoughts on what Obama said in that foundation video. He goes on to note, Obama prosecuted more journalists using the Espionage Act than all presidents before him combined, talks about Chelsea Manning, talks about drone bombings and killings of innocent people. It is, I think, from the perspective of 30,000 feet. When you look at the Obama administration's use of drone warfare, of the Espionage Act, and I'll get into some other stuff in just one moment, but let's just stop with those two in particular. And of course, Dore goes on to talk about other things, but those two in particular, this is the man, as Maron says, one of the reasons he wanted to go out with an Obama interview is that he wanted to talk to the, quote, hope guy. He says it's hard to find a way through in terms of hope, so I went to the hope guy. That's what Maron told the New York Times. And man, does that feel poetic. Marc Maron, this man who ushered in this chapter of new media, this man who bought into the hope and change that Barack Obama sold most of the country after those divisive and contentious years after 9/11 during the war on terror in the Bush administration. It's so easy to forget because the two terms of Obama seemed to be an escalation from that period. If anything, just culturally, socially, we felt more and more divided. But it's easy to forget how romantic the vision that Obama sold the country in 2008 was, how many people were seduced by it. And Marc Maron being one of them, sort of turning to Obama in this moment as someone who actually has credibility on that question of hope for the future still, after Obama sold hope to the American public, and then actually in so many ways doubled down on the path that worried people when they voted for Obama, which is to say, partisan politics. He sort of sold himself as, yes, a change agent in almost a populist sense. Again, it sounds crazy to think back on that, but it was true. A change agent. Obama was going to be different. He was going to transform our politics, not red and blue, but purple. We could come together in a bipartisan fashion and find solutions. He was going to break the cycle of kind of adventurism in the Middle East and around the world. One of the first things he did after being sworn in was go on that now infamous tour of the Middle East, which conservatives called an apology tour. And it was sort of a post-Cold War sort of making amends, effort to kind of make amends with countries, particularly in the Middle East. He really presented himself as somebody who was not going to go down the path that so many people were frustrated with going down. They were upset, of course, in the wake of the recession with big corporations. Obama, I mean, like, this is Barack Obama helped bring in the era of big tech, his administration helped rubber stamp a lot of these mergers that consolidated the power of Silicon Valley in really important ways. There are serious criticisms of what Dodd-Frank did to Wall Street and how, in many ways, I mean, this is debatable, it's arguable. Same thing with Obamacare, but comprehensive legislation under Obama, quote, comprehensive legislation. So the Affordable Care Act, Dodd-Frank, there were a lot of carve-outs to industry, and not just as sort of normal parts of compromise. There were a lot of happy lobbyists after both of those signature pieces of Obama's legislation was passed. It was not ultimately the presidency of hope and change. By the time Barack Obama left office, Democrats had hemorrhaged positions and down ballot roles and races around the entire country. And so it's funny that Marc Maron, as he exits this moment of the chapter that he helped open in New Media, is turning to Barack Obama, because I think it signals why Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz have sort of outpaced I'm assuming Maron is Gen X or Boomer, but outpaced the Gen X/Boomer, other Gen X/Boomer people who kind of still buy in to the Obama hope and change narrative. And just, it's not even kind of in the case of Maron. He is explicitly buying into Obama era hope and change and closing his podcast with Obama era hope and change. And that's what's really fallen out of fashion. It's not just Obama era hope and change, but it's also Romney era anti-Obama conservative politics. That's what this chapter of American politics and American media is about right now. And Maron seems to be pretty disinterested in grappling with that. And I think that's a really big deal. I think that probably, again, speaks to where the Joe Rogans and the Andrew Schultzes and the Theo Vaughns have more energy and dynamism to them. It's because they are willing to challenge the entire structure. And that's not what people want to hear, because they felt like Obama challenged the entire structure in his campaign and then didn't do it in office. Right now, Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, Andrew Schultz, those guys are being critical of Donald Trump because they don't feel he is challenging the entire structure like he said he would on his campaign trail. Now, does this set an impossible standard for politicians? Perhaps. But the incentives now, whether you're Marjorie Taylor Greene or Joe Rogan, is to keep asking these questions, to keep pulling at these threads, and to hold people in political office to the standard that they actually, if they sell hope and change, need to deliver on it, that you're not going to sort of take the packaged narrative that Obama sells to the New York Times or the Washington Post circa 2011 about these policies and say that's good enough. That era is over, and partially it's because of media incentives that Marc Maron very poetically, I think, helped set. But it's also because, I mean, let's talk about Barack Obama, James Comey. Let's talk about DACA, Dear Colleague letters. I'm going to get into all of that because I think it's perfectly relevant here as well. Some of these questions about like authoritarianism, of course, Jimmy Dore is not wrong to look at the drones and Espionage Act usage from the Obama era as being objectionable. let me just also add to that from a conservative perspective. This is not just normal criticisms from the right of a left-wing presidency. Obama actually did really challenge some norms that people should have been uncomfortable with at the time, but the left wasn't super concerned with at the time. And we have come to learn, for example, the way the Obama-era FBI was weaponized. I'm going to read from BBC here. Remember when I was new media pool the day Tulsi Gabbard said that basically Barack Obama was being referred to the FBI for investigation? And the question I asked Tulsi Gabbard was, does that include former President Barack Obama? She said yes. I'm reading here from I'll read here from the DNI, so the Director of National Intelligence, who is Tulsi Gabbard. I'm reading from a press release mid-July. On Friday, DNI Gabbard revealed overwhelming evidence that demonstrates how after President Trump won the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton, President Obama and his national security cabinet members manufactured and politicized intelligence to lay the groundwork for what was essentially a years-long coup against President Trump. Now, the intelligence community consistently assessed, they say, that Russia is, quote, probably not trying to influence the election by using cyber means. That was in the months leading up to the election. Clapper, according to DNI Gabbard, in December after the election said foreign adversaries, he was the DNI at the time, foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks on election infrastructure to alter the U.S. presidential election. And then Gabbard goes into this meeting that, according to an email sent by Clapper's executive assistant at the time, tasked intelligence community leaders with creating a new assessment, quote, per the president's request that details, quote, the tools Moscow used and actions it took to influence the 2016 election. ODNI will lead this effort with participation from CIA, FBI, NSA, and DHS. And then that was leaked to the Washington Post by Obama administration officials to say, quote, Russia has attempted through cyber means to interfere in, if not actively influence, the outcome of the election. Matt Taibbi has some excellent reporting breaking down the evidence over at Racket about what actually Gabbard is talking about. We've had him on the show, actually, to talk about this. So go back and watch that effort to catch up from a journalistic standpoint about what the evidence that Gabbard is piecing together and what journalists have pieced together to implicate Obama looks like. The picture does indeed look like the Obama-era intelligence community was intentionally cooking up reports and then leaking them to the press to give the impression that Russia basically tilted the election in Donald Trump's favor, and that Trump, in some ways, was complicit in that. And in a less charitable description, you could say those leaks were intentionally placed to accuse Trump of being part of that broader scheme. That was, again, this is evidence that's saying this was at the president's direction. That this new intelligence assessment was ordered. Either way, the origins of the Russian collusion hoax started in the Obama-era FBI under James Comey. So, yes, that's supposed to be roughly independent of the president. Obviously, when you're looking at evidence like this, it was not all independent of Barack Obama. That's not all that was happening. Of course, and you'll remember it was Loretta Lynch, that famous tarmac meeting with Bill Clinton as Hillary Clinton's email server was being investigated by the FBI. That was Loretta Lynch was the attorney general for Barack Obama at the time. So these are all kinds of weedy details to try to keep in place and remember. But the bottom line is that the Obama-era Justice Department was weaponized. The Obama-era intelligence community was weaponized in some ways that Obama seems to suggest he's uncomfortable with Donald Trump doing as well. Now, I'm not saying it's apples to apples. I'm saying that there's a pretty good argument. The Obama response to the Bush era promised hope and change, and then actually escalated and made things worse in a way that pushed us closer and closer to Trump himself and into the moment that we're in. It doesn't absolve blame from anyone, but it does present this obvious question to Obama, which he doesn't get. Do you regret? Do you think you played any role in pushing the country to the brink? What does should the right unilaterally disarm itself politically in the face of, again, the Obama-era IRS, for example, giving extra scrutiny to Tea Party groups. Did it eventually come out that that was happening to some left-wing groups? Yes, but it was more, there were more Tea Party groups being scrutinized by the Obama-era IRS. And I'm just telling you, as somebody on the right, that was a formative moment for the conservative movement. That really made people feel like they were going back to maybe like Hoover era, J. Edgar Hoover era politics, and the sort of shoe was on the other foot this time. It was the Republicans that were being targeted. So that all happened under Obama. DACA, the expansion of executive authority. Yes, executive authority has expanded in other unprecedented ways in the past that I find, of course, troubling, that many libertarians with war powers, for example, have found troubling for a long time. But deferred action for childhood arrivals, Obama-era immigration policies, he couldn't get a bill through Congress, so he did it as president through executive actions, executive orders. The education department. This is one of the least covered aspects of Obama-era executive authority expansion. A series of Dear Colleague letters that were sent by the education secretary under the Obama administration, defended by Obama, defended by Joe Biden. Hearing Obama talk about kangaroo courts, not wanting kangaroo courts, it's just rich, because that is what these Dear Colleague letters on Title IX thrust campuses into for years. Dozens of young men, innocent young men, were implicated by campus kangaroo courts that came because the Obama-era education department, as even the Washington Post came to decry. Emily Yoffe had a great series in The Atlantic at the end of the Obama administration about how this was a disaster for higher education in particular, the way that sexual assault claims were being adjudicated because of Obama-era guidelines that did not come through legislation, but came through a Dear Colleague letter. A letter sent by the education secretary. Then, of course, another Dear Colleague letter towards the end of the Obama presidency, with the stroke of a pen, completely changed how K-12 schools around the country and colleges treated the question of sex and gender, because they read, quote, gender identity into Title IX's forbidding of universities to discriminate, quote, on the basis of sex. That was critical in ushering in the era of divisive politics on transgenderism. It changed, again, at the stroke of a pen. It changed the way bathrooms and locker rooms around the country, for children, for adults. It changed, basically changed the way schools had to teach sex and gender differently. All of that, again, not through legislation, not through the Equality Act or anything like that, not through the Equal Rights Amendment. This was changed with the stroke of a pen from the education secretary. To act as though that was not unprecedented, and Obama got so little criticism from it. Camille Paglia actually at the time said that was the moment she thought Hillary Clinton was going to lose the election, when the Obama administration did that. But there's been so little reckoning with the expansion of executive authority under Barack Obama, with the expansion of the surveillance state under Barack Obama, with the surreptitious expansion of the surveillance state under Barack Obama. And, people like Glenn Greenwald and, of course, Jimmy Dore have been talking about this for a long time. But the Marc Marons, who are still clinging to this idea that Obama represented and ushered in a season of hope and change before the evil Republicans over at Fox News, being sort of puppeted by Rupert Murdoch, trashed the country, destroyed it, and thrust the authoritarian Donald Trump on the country. I mean, that narrative is really destructive, and it's really divisive, and it's, I think, one of the reasons that nobody can move on from doom spiral politics. And partially it's because the Marc Marons of the world just they're in a totally different bubble. And again, there's bubbles, everyone's in a bubble. But the Marc Marons of the world, who don't think that they're in bubbles, and who do think that they have a good grasp on reality and what's happening in American politics, there's just so little reckoning with what happened leading up to Trump, with obviously the post-Trump 1.0 lawfare, with Russia collusion. It's frustrating. And again, I really think it's one of the reasons that we can't get out of the doom spiral that we talk about here on Undercurrents all of the time. And you see a willingness among the Joe Rogan, some of the ascendant podcasters/comedians, who are being rewarded by media right now, or in the media ecosystem, not by legacy media certainly, but are being rewarded by the algorithms and the new media ecosystem incentive system, because what people want in the era of peak smartphone politics, as I started calling it lately, if I pull up my phone here, the most prolific form of communication right now is video, basically vertical video that you can view on a phone, on an app. And what that does is incentivize people to have little production, right? And to speak in a way that feels raw, directly into a phone. And that means people expect a new type of authenticity. And it can go in different ways, but Obama still, he was a politician for early Facebook, before everyone's smartphone had cameras, and before TikTok, and before this proliferation of vertical smartphone video across social media, before social media hit critical mass. He was elected at a time where he was very good in these controlled environments at looking like he was off the cuff. And that's no longer what's prized. You actually have to actually be off the cuff. Even if you're off the cuff and still being dishonest, you have to at least be off the cuff. Bernie Sanders on Andrew Schultz is a really good example of this. And AOC is kind of learning. I'm just talking about the left now, but Trump is the master. There's nobody better than Trump at this. So that's what the future of politics is going to look like. It makes people uncomfortable when it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Certainly, it's going to make people uncomfortable when it's a left-wing version of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But the parties right now are losing control because they haven't figured out how to adapt. And the podcasters like Marc Maron haven't figured out how to adapt. So this is a long way of kind of dissecting the importance of this interview as a sort of point A and point B of the arc of one chapter of new media that I think Marc Maron and Barack Obama were both a really critical part of. And just the next chapter is now open. And this feels like two endpoints. This feels like bookends of that other chapter to continue torturing the literary metaphor here. Thank you so much for tuning in to Undercurrents. There's so many different ways that we could go with this story. I feel like I still have so many different things to say about it because there's so many substantive, and then downstream of that, substantive media questions, substantive policy questions, and then substantive media questions that arise because of it. I'll leave it there for today. We'll, of course, continue to cover it. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Subscribe on YouTube. Help us get to 100,000. We're so excited to hit that milestone. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. We'll see you back here with more soon.